We're going to start our first assignment with a small subset of Python. We're going to talk about expressions, variables, and assignment statements. And mostly we're going to use Python as a type of calculator. What I'd suggest is for you to bring up your idle environment and to watch this tutorial, but also try these things as you're seeing them in the tutorial so that you can get a feel for how this works. So when you bring up the idle environment, you'll see the shell window on the left-hand side. If I hit the enter key, I get a prompt. And our presentation is going to be on the right-hand side here. This section is going to cover about 6 topics, and in this tutorial we're just going to cover the expression and assignment statements. So let's get started. To evaluate an expression, we simply type it in. 3 plus 7 gets evaluated immediately. 5 divided by 2. And we can mix operators. You'll notice that we're having addition and multiplication here. And one question is, how does this get evaluated? Is it simply left or right? Python, like most languages, have what's called an order of precedence. And multiplication and division gets done first. Addition gets done next. If it's all the same, then it gets done from left to right. So here, the multiplication would get done first. 7 by 3 is 21, then the addition. So this is standard rules of algebra. You'll notice that some numbers here have decimal points and some don't. The numbers without decimal points are called integers. The numbers with decimal points are called floats. So that's the difference between an integer and a float. Float simply has a decimal point in it. The precedent rules are that multiplication and division is done first, addition and subtraction is done last. If you have a number of the same level of precedent, 3 plus 6 minus 2, it's simply done left to right. Now you'll notice sometimes I put spaces in there, sometimes I don't. Generally, for good programming practice, spaces are included to make the program more readable. We can use brackets. And brackets have a higher order of precedence than either multiplication and division, so the brackets are done first, and then the division is done here. If we want to do exponential, say 2 to the 3rd power, we use a double star. And generally when we do that operator, we're generally write it like that. 2 to the 4th power should give us 16, and so on. Few operators you may not have seen before are called the integer quotient. We'll look at this. And integer quotient's done with 2 division signs. And an integer quotient takes the second operand here, 3, divides it into 14, and it gives us the integer result of that. That is, how many times does 3 go into 14? Well, it goes into 14 4 times with a remainder of 2. So if I do an integer division, it will give me 4. 8, integer division 3, well, that will go in twice. Let's suppose we wanted to know the remainder. So 14, and here we use a percent sign. What this does is it takes 3, divides it into 14. Instead of finding out how many times it goes into 14, it finds the remainder. Here the remainder should be 2. Now this is often called the modulus operator, the percent symbol. Now, in algebra, you have functions. Here's a function f of x, which gives us x plus 1. We can also have functions in Python. There are many built-in functions. We're going to look at one called the absolute function. And this does the absolute value. It's built in, so we can use it. And you'll notice when we type it in, it gives us some hints as to how to use it. That is, ABS takes a number, and it's in purple here, so we can see that it's a keyword. So the absolute value of -7 should be 7, which it is here. There are also min and max functions. So we'll look at a min function of a bunch of numbers. And the minimum of that should be -3. And we can do a max. And we'll find the maximum value. So those are an example of some Python functions that are built in. So for your first little exercise, we're going to get you to do these 5 little exercises here. Try to complete each of these. Pause the video, and when you unpause it, the answers will be here, and you can compare them with how you've done. So if you have it done, we'll take a look at the answers here. The first 5 positive integers, we're adding them together, should give you 15. If we're taking the average of these 3 numbers, simply add them together, put them in brackets, divide by 3, 3 numbers. Number of times 73 goes into 403 should be 5. 2 to the 10th power is 1024. And in the lowest price, we're going to use a function min, but we can't use the $sign. That will give us an error. We simply need to use the numbers. So that's a little review of using some of the math operators and some of the functions. Let's now look at Boolean expressions and operators. Now, a Boolean expression is not something that evaluates to a number, like an integer or a float. It evaluates to what is called a Boolean value, which is true or false. So we'll give an example here of a Boolean expression. 2 is less than 3. Well, that's going to evaluate either true or false. 2 is less than 3, so it evaluates true. 3 is less than 2 should evaluate false. If we look at this, the math operators here are done first on either side, and then the Boolean operator is applied. So you'll see that the math additions, multiplication, division, adding and subtracting have a higher precedence than the Boolean operators. So 5 minus 2 is 3. Is 3 greater than 3? No, it's not, so we'll get a false answer. Now let's look at some of the other operators that you can use in a Boolean expression. And this is equal. This is a test to see if 3 is equal to 3. Now, this is not to be confused with an assignment statement you're going to see later. If we had a single equal sign, this is actually assigning the value 3 to the variable x. And guaranteed you're going to make this mistake when you're using Boolean expressions. So if we want to test to see if 3 plus 5 is equal to 4 plus 4, we use a double equal sign. We have less than, but we also have less than or equal. We can do that. We have greater than, and we have greater than or equal to. And to test to see if something is not equal to, we use what's called the bang operator with the equal sign. 3 is not equal to 4. Well, that's actually true. And so those are all the Boolean operators that you can use in a Boolean expression. So what you'll find here is something that you can test yourself. So try to perform these Boolean exercises. Type each one out and see what you get. Pause this video now, and then we'll have the answers for you. Here's the answers to these. You can pause this and take a look. The last one might have been a little tricky. We're trying to find out if something is divisible evenly by 19. Really what we're also trying to do is see if does 19 go into this with a remainder of 0. So we use the modulus operator and we test to see if that's equal to 0. And you can see I made the same mistake. I'm sure every student will make several times. When you're testing to see if something's equal to another value, you need to use the double equal sign. And this number is evenly divisible by 19. There's a few more here that you can test. Pause the video and then take a look at your answers. So finding out if 31 is even, another way of stating that is it evenly divisible by 2? 31 modulus 2 gives us 1, not 0, and so it's not an even number. We get a false answer here. Minimum of a multiple numbers, we'll use a minimum function and then find out if that's less than $30. You can also generate what are called compound Boolean expressions, best shown by an example here. Perhaps we want to see if 2 is less than 3 and if 4 is greater than 5. So in an AND operation, the left side has to be true as well as the right side here, or all Boolean expressions have to evaluate true. Only when they're all true, when this is true and this is true, do we get a true out. We can also use the key words true and false. True is always true, so this side is true. 2 is less than 3 is true. Since both of these are true, we get a true result. What about OR functions? 3 is less than 4, or 4 is less than 3. In an OR function, we only need one of the Boolean expressions to be true. 3 is less than 4, that's true, so it doesn't matter what happens here, that's going to be true. 3 is less than true, or 2 is less than 1. We look at this side, this is not true. So we can look at the other side, that's also not true. Since neither of these are true, the result is false. Not is the inverse of a Boolean expression, so if we have not, 3 is less than 4. Well, 3 is less than 4, that's true, but we have a not, which makes the whole thing false. So not true will give us false, and not false will give us true. We're now going to look at variables and assignments. And you're probably pretty familiar with this in math. You can have a variable name such as x equal to and then some value, as in x equals 4. And if you then just hit x, you'll see it's got the value 4. you can use that in other expressions. So now that we've assigned x a value of 4, we can use it in the right-hand side of another assignment statement. So we're assigning count 4 times x. X already has a value of 4, so that assignment for count should set it to 16. Note that we'll often put spaces in around these operators for good legibility. What happens if we tried to print a variable that we haven't assigned anything to? We'll just put z here. What we get here is called the traceback error, and so you'll see this gives us some information about that. Name z has not been defined. Sometimes the error messages can be more cryptic. Here it's pretty explicit as to what happens. Okay, so again, let's test yourself. Try these 3 problems. Put your video on pause, and then we'll show you the answers. Here are the answers for those 3 simple assignment statements. I've also printed C so you can see if you have the right answer for C. Now I guarantee at some point you'll want to actually test to see if x is equal to 7, and you'll write it this way as an assignment statement. You'll look at it several times. It's hard to pick up these types of mistakes, but try to be aware that this is a very easy mistake to make. You're trying to do a Boolean evaluate a Boolean expression, but you leave out one of the equal signs and do an assignment instead. Okay, well, what can you use for variable names? Well, you can use any of the lowercase and uppercase letters, the underscore, and any of the digits, except you're not allowed to use a digit in the first character. Everything's case sensitive, so the word TEST and capital TEST are 2 different variable names. Some of these are legal and some of these aren't. You can try them and find out which ones are legal and which ones aren't. You'll notice a bad character here. Variable names should be meaningful. You should follow some conventions. A convention which is often used in C and similar languages is something called camel case, where the first letter of a complex name or a compound name is not capitalized, but all other sort of words in there that make up the variable name are capitalized. An example would be the price of coffee. So that's called camel case. You can't use reserved keywords, and you saw back here we had several reserved keywords, and, true, or, those are all reserved keywords. To get a list of all the reserved keywords, you can import a module called keyword, and then you can keyword.keyword list, and it will actually print out all the keywords here that you can't use. That's the end of this lesson. Try the first assignment on the web page and submit that to your instructor.